Well, I have the unfortunate slot to be the only thing between you and lunch. So I will try to maybe give you some of the bottom lines in the intro. And if you feel like you are too hungry, you can skip after the 3 minutes intro. And later we will dive into the details. First of all, thank you for the invitation and also the very nice presentation before me. I think it's a very nice demonstration that we don't look enough on the connection between the brain and the body, yeah? So, you know, to diagnose the ADHD, we can go in the brain, the attention network, and try to look into changes and so on and so forth. But as you show, we can look in the body. The same thing, very few people know that, for example, each mental state we have is resulting in very different body distribution temperature. And you can even modulate your mood based on varying these temperatures and things like this. So basically, a little bit about my background. I did PhD in computational neuroscience at Hebrew University, spent a year at the NIH, Harvard Medical School, 10 years at the Hebrew University. And 4 years ago, I moved to Reichman University to set up an institute that is exactly interested to work on this gap between basic science and technology. So the idea is to use insights from the brain and from basic science to create new technologies. And on the other hand, to try and use this technology to answer basic questions in neuroscience. So I will give you 5 examples or the evolution of the research. The first question we were interested was a basic, maybe before I will dive into this, I want to give you another example about these connections between the body and the various systems inside the body and the brain, and how it can revolutionize the way we think about problems and how to solve them, yeah? So, for example, for many, many years, when you try to cure or develop drugs for Alzheimer, you try to deal with the plaques in the brain, yeah? So we have plaques, they cause the neurons to die, and it's in a very specific network, and this causes the problems in spatial cognition and verbal cognition mostly, yeah? And later all the others, yeah? And there is a beautiful work by Professor Michael Schwartz that is a collaborator for the last year, which showed that actually if you are removing the connection between the brain top down to the body, to the spleen, for example, from the hypothalamus, then you develop a very rapid Alzheimer. And the idea is that there is very tight link between the immune system and the brain, and actually Alzheimer is a result of increased inflammation in the body and then in the brain, okay? And this very tightly linked are very important to the disease. And once you understand that, and later the plaques are a result of this inflammation. So actually, instead of wasting, quote unquote, tens of billions and trillions of dollars developing drugs for the plaque, let's deal with the inflammation. So this is one part of the equation, understanding better that actually a lot of what we perceive in the world, visual, audio, and so on, is not the input to the system, but the process in the brain, and there is a lot of connections between the brain, within the brain, just like Professor Avraham Peled lecture, and also between the brain and the body, which is key, and we just start to understand it. So what can we do, for example, in the case of Alzheimer, if this is the case? So one option to do is to go into these pathways and use methods that are, it's very nice to dream big, like Neuralink, and say we'll interface it with the brain and so on. But there is a lot of methods that you can influence both the connectivity within the brain in matter of hours and tens of hours, non-invasively, just by interacting with our senses, yeah, and our body. So one example, for example, is progressive muscle relaxation and breathing exercise can influence the inflammation level of cortisol and IL-6 and very specific markers in the immune system. Yeah, so this is one thing you can do. You can take now all this clinically proven in clinical trials method and digitize them and use this combination of smartphone, VR, AI, to optimize this method and check. You need to check that really what you're doing is modulating what you want to modulate. Yeah? Another thing you can do is use digital technology and AI to modulate directly the connectivity in the brain, okay? And the activity in the brain. So I will show you in a series of studies that non-invasively, in a matter of hours to tens of hours of interacting with digital technology, you can, for example, go to this very specific network that we know today quite accurately that the first symptoms are in a network in the hippocampus, the stereoparietal cortex, and the peripheral visual navigation system. This is the main areas that start to generate. And the connectivity degenerates, and the activity degenerates, and the gray matter degenerates. And as it progresses, the severity goes higher, and also it spreads to the rest of the brain. Yeah? So can we use, for example, training of the functions that are deteriorated and try to increase the activity level, the volume of the gray matter, the connectivity? And we just published a paper now in Current Biology by Professor Elena Agius-Vela in collaboration with Shachar Mandenbaum, a former student that is now professor at Be'er Sheva, and another student, Daniel Shabbat, which is now professor at Ariel University. And basically, using this method, we showed that in a matter of 6 hours of digital training combined with blindfolding, why blindfolding? We might have time to talk in a second. We can actually modulate dramatically the activity in over 200% in the relevant network and increase the connectivity. This is already unpublished data that we are working on for the next publication. So you can both look at this connection between the brain and the immune system and modulate them digitally, and you can go to the connection in the brain and the activity and try to modulate it. Okay? So this is basically the bottom line of what I wanted to show you. And the idea is basically mixing medicine with software in a smart way, but in a way that is very science-backed and science-tested and stemming from insights from clinical trials, from basic research and so on. So I probably would have time only to give you this very wide overview of why we went to the brain body, why we went to the blindfolding and so on and so forth, and give you a few examples of this approach of reprogramming the brain non-invasively in a matter of hours to tens of hours, okay? So one example is the question of critical period. So there is this beautiful work of Hubel and Wiesel that won the Nobel Prize in '81 that showed that if you close one eye for 30 days when the animal, after it was born in a given window, then when you remove the blindfold, this Moshe Dayan, yeah? This eye will be blind and the brain will not develop any activity to input from this eye, although everything is fine there. Okay, the photoreceptor is fine, the activity is fine, everything is okay. Okay, and if you do it for both eyes, this animal will be blind for the rest of its life, although everything in the system is fine. Okay, so the message is that we must have activity during the critical period in order to develop the function and the activity in the brain and the specializations in the brain, okay? And later it was shown also to the auditory system, to the language system, to memory, to high-level functions, to emotion, and so on and so forth. Now, after that there was argument, and by the way, if you do this Moshe Dayan in one eye, both eyes, when you're adult already, and 18, let's say, you remove the blindfold, nothing happens. You see perfectly fine. You have a minute or two of a bit, your vision is a bit shaky, and then it's back to normal, okay? The question is how much of this animal studies translates to human, and I will just give you the bottom line in a series of various studies done on 2 models, one with technology and one without technology. We showed that this critical period theory is not holding water for humans. And you can develop activity that is specific to the function and the specializations in the brain in a matter of hours to tens of hours, okay? How we did it? One was with the technology. So for example, we created the technology that's called the iMusic. It's basically, you can think about it in a nutshell, like an inverse ultrasound, okay? What is ultrasound? You put a lot of sounds into the belly, And from the reflection, you create a three-dimensional image. And if you do a bit of more mathematics, you can create a video. Yeah? And we are familiar from this. We're going to test if we have a boy or a girl or everything is fine. Yeah? So what we created is basically exactly the same. We took information from a camera, embedded information in the sounds, and now the brain of the blind learn in perceptual learning these sounds and create an image of a word, of an apple, of a hammer, of faces, of facial emotion in real life, and so on and so forth. And then we go back to the brain and scan it longitudinally. Before, always in our study, we try to do longitudinal study in which we study what happened before the training and after the training with the technology. And to make a long story short, we see that all these 30% of the visual system, and later in a series of studies tackling pathway after pathway, area after area, we show we can retrieve function and activity in the area of persons that never saw one photon in their life. Okay? So it means, what does it mean? It means it's actually a hopeful message. Why? Because it says, first of all, we agree with Hubel and Wiesel, and we have a series of other papers that I won't get into about how much the brain is more plastic when we are young. With this part, we completely agree. And by the way, and we have a decrease on it until the age of 6. And then actually we have another, the טיפש עשרה is actually a good thing, the גיל טיפש עשרה. Why? Because actually there is another bump in the plasticity. I think, like my interpretation of it is that it makes our brain readapt to a new environment. So we have one environment when we are born, and then we have another chance to shape the brain before we are becoming adults and adjust to this environment that we are almost there. And then it's according to Hubel and Wiesel, it's dying, yeah? And what we show is that some of our subjects are 60, 65, and with very minimal relative training of hours to tens of hours with new technology, we can reprogram, as I showed you in a second, the connectivity within the network of navigation and spatial and verbal cognition. We can reprogram the visual system in this case. In a lighter study, a more recent study led by, you can see here, I think it's Dr. Adi Snir, and also Ido Wald, our CTO here, and Dr. Kasia Siesla, work on creating a similar system, but here we had another challenge. This technology was very successful to ask all these questions about basic science and how we can reprogram the brain. By the way, another model to look at this question, so some people would say, okay, this is with the technology, but what about, you know, if you don't use sounds? Can we really take somebody that is 20, 25, that never saw, make him see again, and see whether he would see? Yeah, this will be the ultimate result. And there are several groups in the world that do a humanitarian effort and remove cataracts of people that were born with cataracts. So there is two types of cataract. One age-related, and one is you are born with it. And some people would live in a village that don't have the ability to basically create, do the surgery, and they only met with this humanitarian effort when you are 20, 25. And Dr. Amber Maimon, which is also here, and you can ask her more details, it's all a very wide overview, teamed up with a group from Stanford of Jeff Tabin, and basically saw that very quickly after the removal of the cataract of people that never saw in their life, although there they do see if the light is on or off. They can't see any shape, but they see if it's, because it's not completely, it's not like the Moshe Dayan, it's giving some light, so there is a little bit of advantages to each model. But basically, in the day after the surgery, there is already understanding of shape, geometry concepts, and so on and so forth. 3D is not recovered immediately, and you need to rehab it with technology and perceptual learning, but it shows us that this concept of critical period needs to be revisited. On the other hand, we saw that another thing that I think is very important, this is a technology conference, an AI conference, is that sometimes it's not enough to have a good technology or a reasonable technology. You need to think about the human in the equation, and the human in the center. No problem, 5 minutes, just stop me, whatever. I will anyway just do the overview and very quickly, maybe one example if we have time. So for example, we had the technology that works good in the lab, but the problem is that we had to sit for 50 hours with each blind and teach them personally And when you try to move it into an update which teach them and so on and so forth, it becomes very difficult and problematic. And even half a year is difficult for some of them. And people are a bit lazy, you know. Not in a bad sense, we are all lazy. Yeah? If we have the remote, we will press on the remote. Yeah? We want to work less. Yeah? So it's very important to think about something that would give you benefit immediately and doesn't require a lot of training. Yeah? So this is, for example, why it's nice. You can go in a YouTube and have something that will give you a preliminary assessment, and maybe you'll go later and test it. So for this new project, what we did is a similar concept to here. We took sound waves and we online shifted them into, so basically you can think about it as a Fourier analysis. We know all the frequencies and the relations between them, and we shift it into the range that is optimal to the touch system, which is much lower frequencies. And another trick we did was to add a weighting between the two ears to create a feeling of where the sound comes from, okay? And we basically created the first 3D technology in the world that can represent immediately, with zero training, understanding of the space around you. And we have a series of projects. One is to improve speech understanding in noise and understanding of music of cochlear implant patients, for example, that cannot understand, for example, the words in lyrics, although they can do it in speech. We have a EU project to integrate this into VR, and there is many applications and so on and so forth. And by the way, all what we create is also MRI compatible, so we go back to the MRI and see that actually the music, speech, and so on, networks in the brain that usually responds to sound start to respond to these vibrations and different frequency of touch. So it's another example of this. The third line of work is exactly what I told you about this connection between the brain and the body, especially in the context of the emotional system. So for example, there is plenty of evidence that shows the different intervention of the body, that first of all, a lot of psychiatric and psychological disturbances have manifestation in the body, yeah? We're all familiar that if we are very stressed, now I'm stressed that I have only 3 more minutes, yeah? And I have a bit of a feeling in the tzavar, in the neck, yeah? And here, yeah? And I just told you that actually you can have a very direct different distributions, like for example, if when you are sad, you have more cold in the feet and so on and so forth. And so you have manifestation of the mental states and the emotional state in the body, but the scientific community didn't know where is the link, why I have this in the body. So in a series of papers led mainly by Noah Scharia, Dr. Noah Scharia in her lab, we showed that actually there is body maps engraved inside the limbic system. So for example, insula is an area that is modulating the hypothalamus and in turn the immune system. And actually there is a body map there when you do progressive muscle relaxation. And this explains why in clinical trials, when you do progressive muscle relaxation and breathing exercise, you see a change in the cortisol level and on the immune system markers, yeah? So now we can take this and implement it into clinical environments. So one environment, for example, is a project we did with Professor Ben Cohn, which is the head of radiotherapy in Shaare Zedek, and Ty Farrow, which is the architect that is building the new Center for Radiotherapy and Chemotherapy, basically the new cancer center, a beautiful building in Jerusalem that is just starting to operate this year. And we embed special environments that actually create an immersive digital experiences that can modulate your emotional state and your immune system. And if you want more details about that, you can talk with Ido, Vald, and Amber Maimon, which are here, and just presented this work at CHI, the Human-Computer Interaction Conference in Hamburg, about like 2-3 weeks ago. So this is one effort. So basically, we are connecting different sensors, breathing. Maybe with your algorithm, we can just look at video instead of having sensors, and connect them into unique experiences that we know from the clinical trials that can modulate your brain activity and your emotional state, and we try to reduce claustrophobia, anxiety, pain, and so on and so forth. And the last example is the example I gave you with Alzheimer or with immuno-oncology. basically states that in case of immuno-oncology, I talked a little bit about Alzheimer, we have a situation which we are trying to use the immune system to fight the tumors. But there is some question of how much it's going less and less with time. Some people respond less good to it, although this is the most expensive and first line, and so on and so forth. So you can actually manipulate and enhance the function of the networks in the brain and the top down into this, and the same with Alzheimer. So in a nutshell, this is an overview. I guess, finished my time, so I won't have time to show you anything. Maybe I would just show you a very quick clip of... Okay, great. So two very quick clips. So you see here this ultrasound, like kind of making a blind person as a bat or a dolphin. And reconstructing in real time the facial expression or this. And then when we look in the brain, we see this recruitment of the stream. And I won't have time to show you all of this. But basically, you can think about the mirror system, for example. There's a function that is very important for learning. So I can open a bottle like this, and a kid would look at me and open my smartphone. He's doing it by converting information from the body, visual body area, into the mirror system that converts vision into movement. So one of the questions we ask, if people never saw in their life, and we teach them how to understand the body. Yeah, and then we put them in the MRI and see they can reprogram their body area and show activity, also for faces. This is a summary of all the papers and all the areas that we went one by one. Actually, there is not one area, visual area, that we cannot reprogram. This is the cataract project. And I want to finish with 1 minute of this new technology that enable you basically to integrate haptics in 3 dimensions into 3-dimensional space. So you can see here, by the way, Dr. Adi Snir, you can see here 2 twins that were born blind, deaf in this case, didn't hear anything at the age of 4. Then went to a cochlear implant surgery, and although they used the implant for bilateral for over a decade, they cannot localize anything in space. That's been tested in the lab in this ambisonic room that we built. But they put the fingers here, suddenly they can localize sound in 3 dimensions immediately, no training. And now the twin doesn't have the touch
מצביעה בדיוק לאיפה שהראש שלך מצביעה.
אני חייב להגיד שזה מטורף, כי אני לא שומע מה שהיא... תקשיבו, היא עושה ככה, כאילו... אני מבטיחה לך, כשתשבי פה, את תביני מהר.
עכשיו תנסי למצוא את הינשוף בלי הרטט. איפה הוא?
לא יודע... הכל...
קרס.
עליי, לא יודעת, אני לא יודעת. כמו שתמר שומעת.
תשמעו, זה מטורף, זה מרגש ברמות. בואי תשבי פה.
עכשיו התאומה, ברגע שיש לה את ההפטיק,
יפה, מדהים. את עושה את זה מושלם. מי אמרנו יותר מתעניינת במוזיקה? תנסי לשבת על זה.
ולשכפל אותו במגע.
אנחנו יכולים להשמיע את הסימפוניה התשיעית של בטהובן, שחלק מהמוזיקה מוקרן ברטט. אני מסוקרן.
חובות פה בפעם הראשונה מוזיקה.
כאילו, מצד שמאל, כלים נמוכים וטודודום, בתחת פה.
מדהים.
מהמם.
כן?
הרגיש לי שאני בתוך הקונצרט.
טוב, אני אפסיק פה רק כדי להגיד, עוד פעם, אנחנו יכולים להגיע לביצועים של זהים ליכולת המיקום ותנועה, בתלת ממד, ב-360 מעלות של מערכת השמיעה, דרך מגע, ועושים אינטגרציה לזה בשמיעה. אני ידלג על כל הדברים האלה ויודה לכם. אם במקרה השאלה תהיה קשורה ל-body brain, אז יש לי פה עוד סלייד אחד, בסיפור קצר לסיים את זה. או, מצוין. אז אני אוכל להשתמש בדוגמה הזאת, כן. אוקיי. תראו, הנקודה שאני רוצה להעביר פה זה א', האימג' הזה, שהוא נולד הרבה בעקבות העבודה המדהימה של יובל וויזל, שיש לנו מערכות שונות, לכל מערכת יש את האזורי מוח, וגם הגוף הוא מערכת נפרדת, מערכת החיסון נפרדת, לא, הכל מחובר, ואם מבינים את החיבורים האלה, לפעמים הם, יש, sorry, אנגלית? I moved to Hebrew? Okay, sorry. So the bottom line is everything is connected, okay? So let me give you one example about something that we all experience, pain, yeah? What is pain? We have nociceptors, receptors, that if it's heat or burn and it's moved to the brain and this is pain, yeah? Yes, this is true, but this is probably 10% of the equation, okay? And it's true for almost any function. And once you understand it, you can try to modulate it. So I will finish with this little story that it's very anecdotal, but it's published in several medical journals independently. It's about one of the most frequent painful accidents we have. And this is, you know, we work in construction and you step on these big nails, yeah? And you have so many construction everywhere in the world, so it happens a lot. And it's a very painful experience. Usually the person doesn't matter how big he is or she is on the floor, is shouting, it's terrible pain. Call the ambulance, rush to ER, give morphine, open the shoes, do surgery, everything is fine, yeah? And then in a few places independently in the world, they have these instances that they have this accident, they rush the person to the ER, he's in terrible pain, he's shouting, they give him morphine, and they come to do the surgery, they open the shoe, and they see that the nail went between the two fingers. So no nociceptors activated, it's just the combination of the visual stimulation and the mindset trigger amazing pain. And it works also the opposite way. If you connect your breathing or you do muscle relaxation to a visual sensor, to a 3D sonification, so on, you can do the reverse. So once you understand that everything is connected, it doesn't matter if it's the auditory system and the touch system, if it's the visual system and the auditory system, it's the brain and the immune system, and so on and so forth, you can start playing with the technology and try to come up with something that even a lazy person can go and modify its brain in a matter of hours to tens of hours. Thank you very much.